we are in a situation in Australia today where the politicians are almost using the Muslim community as a scapegoat to get themselves promoted. From the early Indonesian communities that used to trade with the Aboriginals long before the Dutch and the British arrived here, to the Afghan Kamaliyas who came to this land and helped connect a lot of the parts of this land. We don't have that platform. We don't have the opportunity to go out and say, hey, if you're going to talk about universal human rights, why are we not talking about the women, men, and children in Gaza? Every article is trying to make her sound against the views of the average Australian. Whereas all she is saying is there's two big parties, both prisoned by the lobby groups and the media, both cannot move on issues that are important to the community. And here is the smaller parties and the independents who are able to have a say.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to another episode of TBN. Today we have in our studio a special guest from Muslim Votes Matter, Brother Ahmad Ibrahimi. Brother Ahmad, welcome to our studio. Would you like to tell us what is the purpose of Muslim Votes Matter? What are your aims and objectives?
Well, Sheikh, thank you for inviting me to your wonderful studio. I want to actually start off by acknowledging and appreciating what you've done with the balanced narrative here in WA. You have no idea how much delight we get from knowing that we have our own community-led media platform here in Perth. We have the ability now to share our narrative, our stories, our community's concerns with not only the rest of Perth and WA, but also Australia and even overseas audiences. I think what you have achieved here in the short span of time is remarkable. And like you, over the last 18 months here in Australia, a lot of Muslims have woken up. A lot of Muslims have started to realize that we need to have a voice. We need to be able to share with Australia our stories, our concerns, things that matter to us. Muslim Votes Matter is a very similar community-led grassroots organization. Our aim is to help voice the Muslim community, voice our concerns, voice our issues to both a state and a federal level. Our job and our aim is to go out there and talk about what our community needs to politicians who are willing to listen. That is our job. We are not a political party. We don't have any aims to becoming a political party. We are an inclusive organization that wants to work with the wide array of politicians across the spectrum in sharing our concerns with them and what is important to us. Currently, you will appreciate that Gaza for the Muslim community is the number one concern. The number one concern when we did our surveys back in November was how do we get our politicians to listen to us and listen to our concerns and help to stop the genocide that is happening in Gaza. Alhamdulillah, we have a ceasefire today, a very weak ceasefire. No thanks to the Australian federal government. So we are now working towards sharing those concerns, hopefully during the election cycle with the politicians so that they know what they need to do to make us vote for them. That is our aim, that is our goal.
Basically, in a nutshell, your goal is to advocate for our community's interests.
Exactly.
Okay, and to put pressure on some electorates, like for example, when you say that you're going to engage politically, does that mean that you are going to try to influence elections and encourage the community to vote or not to vote for any particular candidate?
The way we are doing it, we're going about it in a very strategic approach. I think what we are looking at is a review of all the candidates who've put their hands up for the election, whether it is at a federal level and sometimes even at a state level. We're looking at those candidates and saying, well, how do they align with our views? How do they align with our concerns? Are they listening to us or are they writing us off? You know, we are in a situation in Australia today where the politicians are almost using the Muslim community as a scapegoat to get themselves promoted, to get themselves in the front page. And the way we are looking at it is, if the politician is willing to work with the Muslim community and listen to the concerns of the Muslim community and address some of those issues, then we would put our support, we would put our resources to promote that politician. But if the politician is not willing to work with our concerns, is not willing to listen to us, then we have no choice but to say, well, if it's a reciprocal game. If you're not going to listen to us, if you're not going to take our concerns seriously, why should we as a community come behind you and rally behind you and vote for you to be our candidate or to be our leader in that seat? That's the way we're looking at it.
Yes, it sounds good. How will you be able to convince the Muslim community to follow the recommendations of MVM?
Very good question, Sheikh. The way we're looking at it is, first of all, we have to look inside ourselves and we have to look at who we are as a community. We need to be a very humbly proud community of what we have achieved, for what we have achieved here in Australia. You know, from the early Indonesian communities that used to trade with the Aboriginals long before the Dutch and the British arrived here, to the Afghan Kamaliyas who came to this land and helped connect a lot of the parts of this land, till today's modern day Arab, Turk, Indian, Pakistani, Southeast Asian communities who are contributing so much towards this country in a very positive way. We have to be proud of that. We have to understand what we have done to be able to collectively, all of us, Muslims and non-Muslims, to take Australia to where it is today. However, unlike some of the other communities, we don't actually have a say. We don't actually have any involvement in the political sphere of Australia or even our state, or even if you break it down at a community, at a local district council level. So we have to sit back and say, well, what do we have to do to be able to give ourselves that platform, that opportunity to share our story with the wider Australia and become a contributor on that sphere? We are very good at running small businesses. We're very good at working in big corporations. We're very good at teaching in schools. But what do we have to do to be also part of the political sphere? Now, the way we're looking at it is, you've got 800,000 Muslims across Australia. We represent a very small portion of the overall population, just under 4%. But our views and our concerns are not limited to us. Let's take the example of universal human rights. There are very few Australians, I would say almost nil, who disagree that universal human rights is something that we all need to respect and adhere to. So that's not something that only we have in our hearts as Muslims. That's something that all Australians share. But whilst everyone else gets to describe what that means for them, we don't have that platform. We don't have the opportunity to go out and say, hey, if you're going to talk about universal human rights, why are we not talking about the women, men, and children in Gaza?
Yeah, the human rights issue seems to be very selective. We apply it, or the West applies it for some and does not apply it to others. I think what's needed, Brother Ahmed, is our community should understand the political process from the basic level. As you may know, one of our brothers, he intended to run for the state election, and he got over nearly 350 signatures. However, when it came to counting those signatures, we found out that many of those signatures were not even registered in the electoral roll, or their names were not written properly. So it seems like our community has a lot to learn when it comes to political literacy. If this is the situation, then a lot of our votes are actually being wasted.
Yes, I think, and this is where we come in. So, as Muslim Votes Matter, our job is to go out to the community and not only start at that basic level of teaching them about how to register to vote. A lot of Muslim Australians or citizens of this country, but they are not yet registered properly to vote, either because they've frequently changed homes or addresses, or the spellings of their name between their documents vary, or other administrative issues like this. But ultimately, what it means is that they go up to the polling booth and they're not always registered to vote. So they have to usually do either a manual registration on the day, or if they're more proactive before the actual election day, they go into the website, the Electoral Commission website, and make sure that their registration is valid. This is where our job starts. So it's teaching a community about the registration process of voting, but more importantly, once you know that you're registered to vote, who do you vote for? Who is the candidate that works for you and who is the candidate that doesn't work for you? So we've even worked on that and said, okay, well, if we take all the candidates across Australia and create a voting card for them, in the sense that you're giving them a, let's call it a Google star review on how close they're aligned with our concerns and with our issues. That's what we've done on our website. So if you go to muslimvotesmatter.com.au, you can actually see the federal candidates and how they have acted in the past in regards to voting in parliament on issues that relate to the Muslim community. And through that process, you can see for yourself whether that's the candidate that you would like to align yourself with, or would you like to take your vote and put it in someone else's hand.
Okay, that's with regards to the federal election. Are you providing any guidance for the upcoming state elections in WA? A lot of people are asking. They're asking us as imams, and a lot of imams in the mosques, we remain apolitical. But they do need guidance, and that's where they should go to the people who can recommend that, in what manner they should vote.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Sheikh, and we get this question asked a lot by the community. They generally ask us what our views are on particular candidates, but more importantly on particular parties, and that too between state and federal elections. As you know, in WA, in the next 8 weeks, we will have both a state election and a federal election. And this is very important for us to be ahead of. Before I dive into where our focus is, it's probably important for our audience who might not be well aware or well knowledge on the Australian political and government system, to give them a breakdown of how those different levels work. So if you take Australia as a whole, as a continent, as a country, you've got 3 levels of government. At the very top, you've got the federal government, where they sit in Canberra. And then you've got your state government, which in Western Australia is currently under Labor, whose leader is Roger Cook as the Premier of Western Australia. And then you've got the the lowest level, which is your councils. So as an example, where I live, my council is the city of Armidale. And then you look at the state of Western Australia, and then you look at Canberra as the federal government that takes care of the entire country. Each of these levels of government have different responsibilities and different roles. Your basic council level governance relates to your bin collection, your council rates, making sure that the trees are trimmed, making sure that the roads are clean. That's the level. That's the role of the local council. They also deal with government approvals. When it comes to building approvals and sometimes development approvals. So if you're building a new house or you're expanding your house, you usually go to your council for those kind of approvals. Above that comes your state government, and they're generally in charge of everything within the state. Things like healthcare, education, transport, so things like Metronet that we are seeing a lot of expansion in WA, that's your state level. Above this, sits the federal government, and the federal government takes care of a lot of things both within Australia, but more importantly outside of Australia. So foreign relations, the military, immigration, taxes, the monetary policy that governs interest rates or governs how the government at the federal level spends money and on which areas they spend money on. That sits at the Canberra level. When you look at these three levels of government, you start to understand what they do for you and also what is your engagement with them. As an example, if you are getting married, or if you are bringing your spouse or wanting to bring your spouse to Australia, then you go to the immigration department or the Department of Home Affairs, or you go to the department that deals with marriages, deaths, and other things, and that all is at the federal level. But if, for example, you have an issue with your bus not coming on time, or trains breaking down, or you have an issue with your kid's school and your school can't deal with it at that level, then you go to the Department of Education at the state level. So all of these have different roles and responsibilities, and you need to, as a citizen of Australia, you need to be aware of how to deal with that. Our focus, especially given how recently we've set up and where we are to the upcoming elections, our focus is on the federal level. The reason why it's on the federal level is because when we went out to our community across Australia, so Muslim Voice Matter surveyed over 2,000 participants across Australia, Muslim participants across Australia, and the overwhelming number one priority for us is the issue of Gaza and what is happening in Gaza today, and more recently in the West Bank. That is an issue that sits with the Prime Minister, that's an issue that sits with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and so therefore that's at the federal level. So our focus and our attention currently is to work in that space. However, in the future, inshallah, we will have strategies and plans for the federal election, for the state election. Now keep in mind that Muslim Voice Matter is not something that we came up with to just deal with the current issue in Gaza. This is something that we want with the community with us to take forward for 50, 100 years, to be able to give us the ability and empower us to be able to have a say in the political space. So inshallah in the future we will have engagements with the state government, but we'll also have even engagements with the local government. I think the gentleman that you referred to was running for the state elections or was attempting to run for the state elections, but our long-term goal is to have candidates like him both running for local elections and state elections and be able to take part in that space.
The Gaza issue, the Palestine issue, is an important issue for Muslims. Perhaps you could wonder that how much importance does the rest of the Australian population consider this issue?
Look, I think you have to look at this question from a point of human rights. I think, as I said before, there are very few Australians who don't agree with universal human rights, correct, who don't agree with giving everyone the freedom to move, the freedom to live their lives in peace, the freedom not to be caged up by borders everywhere, both land, sea, and air. We live in a free country. We live in a very beautiful country, and something that we have to be proud about. But when you see things that are happening in Gaza and other parts of the world, you have to sit there and wonder and say, well, I'm enjoying all of this, but what is my government doing to enable or restrict what other people are doing in their part of the world? And so when you look at it from a Australia-wide approach, I think the message that we are sending across resonates with a lot of people. Yeah. The only ones who don't reciprocate positively are people who have a political motive to be able to work with the other side. I think for us, the average Australian looks at us and goes, here is an advocacy group who's coming out and educating the community and empowering the community to be able to have a voice and to be able to broadcast that voice. I don't think, like I said, there is a lot of people who would not agree to those points.
How are you going to have an impact on the upcoming elections? I think people need to know the basics, even state elections, even in the matter of voting, preference votes, all these things. I think they're unaware of how to do it properly. Is there going to be any educational programs, how to vote or something like that?
Yeah. So to give you an idea, Australia at a federal level has two houses of government, even at the federal level. You've got the upper house, which is your Senate. You might know Sister Fatima Payman sits at that level. So she and the senators around her are in charge of a lot of the bills that get drafted and a lot of the bills that get converted into law and into act. Below that, you have the government of the day, or what they call the lower house. That is the politicians who generally action a lot of those laws and govern the country. We are focusing in that lower house. The lower house consists of 151 seats across Australia. That is distributed based on populations in each state and also across Australia.
Is that where you're focusing on? Muslim votes matter, are focusing on the lower house?
Yes, so our focus currently is on the lower house at the federal level. The way we're looking at it is there's 151 seats across the country. In order to become a majority government, you need to win half of that plus one. So 76 seats and you become a majority government. So Labour currently is a majority government in Australia. The exception to that rule is if you are close enough to the halfway line, but you're just not there. And so in that case, what you have to do is you've got to create a coalition with a minority party who will then fill up the balance of the seats to give you to that 76 or more. That makes you what you would call then a minority government.
So do they get to choose their coalition, or is it something that is done at that time when they need to pass a bill? Will they choose, or will they have to negotiate with other parties? Or is it that they will choose from that time, once the election is over, and let's say they've won 70 seats, 6 short. So would they need to select 6 independents or 6 other? How does it work?
So the way it works is that at that moment, let's say they've won 70 seats on the night of the election and they are 6 short. They really have the opportunity to go out there and do what they call deals to lock in a coalition government. As an example, if our audience have lived in Australia long enough, they would remember the Julia Gillard election. When she won the election, she was the first female Prime Minister of Australia, but she did not win a majority government. So she had to go quickly and form a minority government with the help of the Greens. So in her 3-year term, where she was the Prime Minister of Australia, she was actually in a coalition party with the Greens. Now, for that time, for the next 3 years, as you are the government of the day, you would be working with those seats, with that other party, the minority party. Now, you could choose for it to be the Greens, you could choose for it to be the Independents, you could choose for it to be Pauline Hanson, you can choose any party you want, but obviously Labour has a tendency, the Labour Party has a tendency to work with the Greens in the past. Likewise, the opposition party today, the Liberal Party, and the Nationals are a coalition. So the Liberals very rarely have won majority government. They've always ruled with a coalition with the Nationals. So that is how the party system works. In terms of preferences, this is a very important thing that we need to understand in Australia. It's a unique thing amongst the Western countries. It's a unique thing in Australia.
The preference vote.
The preference voting. So basically what it means is, let's say that 10% of a electorate votes for the Greens, but the Greens don't get the majority. Then if the Greens have preferenced as a party, they've preferenced Labour, then that 10% of votes automatically go to Labour and it tops up the Labour pool. So that is how the preference system works, and the same goes with the other side. So
So
it
if
just
you-
depends on how the candidates or how the parties choose to preference each other before the election.
When they need to pass something, will they always have to negotiate with that party that they've gone into alliance with? Or can they say, for example, okay, today these people will probably not vote for this thing which we want to vote for, so we'll go to this side and take from independence or one
That's
nation?
correct. That's
They-
correct.
they
Yes,
can
that's
do
very
that,
correct.
so they
So
can,
every bill or every negotiation, let's call it, in Parliament, is done on that basis. So sometimes you will find that the Labour Party and the Liberal Party will agree on something, but the Greens will not. And because they would have enough people on their side, they will get that bill passed, regardless of whether the Greens are part of the Labour camp at that day or not. It doesn't matter. If they've got enough people amongst the 151 seats, if they've got enough people to pass a bill, it doesn't matter where those politicians come from. As long as they've got enough people on their side, they can pass that bill.
like the federal government passed the bills just recently, passed those laws of hate speech, mandatory sentencing for terrorist crimes. What else were there? Many laws that were very rushed and weren't properly debated. So there's this concern by some in the community that the way they're heading, because of this strong, you can say, anti-racism sentiment that we have because of these alleged crimes of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, you can say, well, although that's very much downplayed. The way it's heading is that, God forbid, we don't want it such that one cannot even criticize the policies of a country, and because that could be deemed as, anti-Semitism or something like that. So these are the things that we're concerned about as the community. I mean, many Australians would be concerned about losing their rights, so quickly. Freedom of speech, the right to freedom of expression. Imagine that you can't criticize a country's policies. Does that go for Saudi Arabia? Because if it goes for one country, it has to go for someone else. We can't criticize Afghanistan, we can't criticize China, we can't criticize Russia because it would be anti-Russian, anti-Chinese, Islamophobic. So I think that's something that the Australian public would be very weary of.
Well, exactly. I think the recent passing of the bill when it comes to freedom of speech and when it comes to criticism of certain countries is a great example for our community to see. I mean, the Liberals have no issue with passing those laws because it benefits them and it benefits the lobby groups that they bow down to. But what was a surprise for our community is that it was led by the Labour government, and it was led and sort of designed by them in a way, and they too didn't have any objections with this. So we know that they were under political pressure to pass this. And so you now have two parties who are ultimately agreeing on the same far-right policy driven by lobbyists and external foreign pressure. When you have a situation like that, then you have to sit back and say, well, do we have a choice here between the two parties? Or doesn't matter who we vote for, we end up with the same outcome. And this is where the likes of Teals, the minority parties and the independents come through, because they're the ones who objected to this the most. Obviously, they were not sufficient in numbers, so the bill went through. But imagine in the next election, imagine an outcome where the Teals, the independents, and the smaller parties become even more stronger in terms of numbers and get to have even more of a say in what bills are passed. That's when you get an opportunity to say, well, actually, that candidate or that minister really represents my community and my concerns. Not the lobby groups, but mine.
The fear that a lot of us have is that for how long will those other minor parties resist for example, the way, if I could characterize the Australian government, how it's influenced, I'd like to use the example of the carrot and the stick. The carrot is the funding of the lobbyists, and the stick is the media that is owned by, powerful corporations that have an agenda similar to those who are funding them. So you have the carrot on one side and you have the stick on the other side. And how will the minor parties and those who are not influenced by the lobbies currently, what will their position be in the future?
Well, Sheikh, the simple answer to that is that depends on us. It depends on us as a community. It depends on us as the wider Australian public. If we don't back our politicians, the good, honest ones, if we don't back our politicians, then the media and the lobby groups will have a go at them. But if we stand behind our politicians, the good and the honest ones, if we stand behind our politicians, then regardless of what the media throw at them, we will be able to say, no, we know who that person is, we know what they stand for, we know how they voted on each of the bills in Parliament, so we're going to stand and support them. I'll give you an example. Today, we have Australia's Voice, a political party that started 4 months ago by our sister Senator Fatima Payman. Since the start of that party, I don't think there is any politician in Australia that has been bashed more by the Murdoch media. Even as of yesterday's articles that came out about her, every article is trying to make her sound against the views of the average Australian. Whereas all she is saying is there's two big parties, both prisoned by the lobby groups and the media, both cannot move on issues that are important to the community, and here is the smaller parties and the independents who are able to have a say. Now, if we support those politicians, if we support those smaller parties, we will have a future where they will be more strengthened and they will have more candidates and they will have more support behind them to be able to stand up to those two big parties. That is all dependent on how we do what we do going forward, not just in the next coming election, but the one after that and the one after that. The point of Muslim Voice Matter is not to carry us to the next election and then beat our chests and say, oh, hoo-ha, we've done very well. No, the point of the Muslim Voice Matter and other advocacy groups like us is to help our community find its voice at a state and a federal level. Find our voice in the wider community. It's not just for today or tomorrow, it's for the next 100 years. You know, I myself grew up in Australia. I'm a very proud Australian. I have raised two beautiful kids in this country. When I actually graduated from Australia, I went overseas, lived the expat lifestyle, earned a lot of tax-free salary. But when it was time to raise a family, there was nowhere better than Perth, and there was nowhere better than Australia to bring them back and root myself into this land. Like me, there are thousands of other Muslim families who take Australia as our home. We have no intention of going anywhere. We have no intention of retiring anywhere else other than Australia itself. So it is on us to make sure that the future, not only for us, but our kids and grandkids, is built in a way that is supportive of them and is taking their views and taking their concerns into the fold of the political space.
Yeah, I think one of the main challenges that we can see now is the division that's being orchestrated in the community between the left and the right. I think that's something we as a Muslim community needs to make effort on with, you can say, establishing relations with the broader community so they understand who we are. We engage with them, and yeah, that's just my take on it, because when you read the different media that we have, you know, on the right and on the left, you see a big contrast, and one of the things that we fear is sectarianism and division in this country. So that's something that we as Muslims need to be aware of and to improve on?
Actually, Sheikh, I agree with you. What we're seeing across the world right now is a polarization of political views. Either people are going too far to the left or they're going too far to the right. The elections in Germany this week that brought together two very far right parties to create a coalition, one of which is justifying the Holocaust and making Hitler look good, is an example of how far we have come in just the last 20, 30 years in our views. What we are seeing in the United States right now between Democrats for 4 years, then Republicans for 4 years, and then Democrats for 4 years, we are literally seeing a ping pong match in terms of policies and views. Every time a different president comes on board, executive orders are signed, bypassing the checks and balances that America is known for. And what you are seeing is either the entire country is getting dragged to the far right or dragged to the far left. We know that our deen tells us to stay in the center. Stay in the center in the view that don't go too far to the right and don't go too far to the left. So as Muslims, whether we are here in Australia or anywhere else in the world, we have to understand that when you look at the Australian political space, 80% of Australians consider themselves in the center. There's a minority that sits on the very right, about 10%, and there's a minority that sits at the very left, about 10%. But the majority of Australians are driven by ideas, not ideology, and majority of them are sitting in that center space. And that is where we have to be. And that is, alhamdulillah, where the Muslim community in Australia today is. When we and our views are aligned with 80% of Australia, surely we can make an impact on the system of government and the parties that pretend to be listening to us.
Brother Ahmad, Jazakallah khairan for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on TBN. We hope to see you next time, and best of luck for the upcoming elections.
Thank you, Sheikh. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That's all we have time for today. Hope to see you next time. Keep supporting independent media, and don't forget to subscribe, like and share our videos. Until next time, assalamu alaikum.